The storm that descended on Lake Superior on November 10, 1975, was already shaping into one of the most powerful weather events recorded on the Great Lakes. Meteorologists later charted its intensity with precision, noting pressure drops comparable to ocean-borne systems. For mariners on the lake, its force was understood not through instruments, but through experience. They felt it in the pitch of the ship, the sound of wind against steel, and the way the lake's surface shifted from waves to walls of water. When the Edmund Fitzgerald stopped responding to radio calls shortly after 7:10 p.m., the Arthur M. Anderson immediately recognized the urgency. The Anderson's radar no longer showed the Fitzgerald's return. The crew had been tracking the ship's position for hours due to the Fitzgerald's earlier radar failure, and its sudden absence from the screen meant more than distance or interference. Something had changed. The Coast Guard station at Sault Ste. Marie received the Anderson's report. Radio operators began logging information, asking clarifying questions, and sending out initial calls to the Fitzgerald. They waited for any response that might suggest a temporary issue. But the minutes passed without an answer. The storm continued, filling the radio channels with the hum of static. By this point, the Fitzgerald had endured sustained winds near hurricane force and waves that mariners estimated at over 25 feet. Some waves were larger still, tall enough to obscure the Anderson's pilot house windows. The storm surge pushed water across the lake with enormous momentum. Under such conditions, many vessels slowed to maintain control. Others sought shelter behind islands or near the shore. But the Fitzgerald had continued toward Whitefish Bay, driven by the possibility of reaching safety before dark. When a ship of nearly 730 feet disappears without a signal, the lack of communication is itself a warning. The Coast Guard operators understood this. They began to assess available assets. Helicopters were grounded by the conditions. Smaller rescue boats could not operate safely in the storm. The only vessels capable of responding immediately were other ships already on the lake. The Anderson remained the closest ship in position. Captain Cooper was asked whether he could reverse course and head back into the storm to search for the Fitzgerald. He acknowledged the request, but explained the risk. The Anderson was itself struggling in the heavy seas. Turning around in such conditions required precise maneuvering. The ship could face bow-burying waves, wind broadside impacts, and reduced engine response. Still, after consulting with his officers, Cooper made the decision to assist. The Anderson reduced speed, swung into the wind, and began the slow and dangerous process of retracing its path. Crew members monitored the ship's behavior closely, adjusting throttle and heading to prevent the vessel from pivoting too sharply or rolling too deeply in the waves. Visibility remained poor. Snow squalls continued. The lake surface was a chaotic combination of cresting waves and deep troughs. Searchlights cast narrow beams across the water, illuminating spray and whitecaps but little else. The Anderson's radar struggled with interference from the storm, though it continued to track any large metal objects that might reflect a return. As the Anderson began its search, the Coast Guard contacted additional nearby vessels. The William Clay Ford and the Hilda Marjan were among the ships asked to assist. Each faced its own challenges in turning or adjusting course in the extreme weather, yet all responded. Despite the conditions, the lake's mariners understood the seriousness of the moment. The first phase of the search involved retracing the Fitzgerald's last known position. The Anderson followed the projected trackline, scanning for any sign of debris, lights, or life rafts. The waves made this task extraordinarily difficult. Even large objects could disappear quickly behind swells. Smaller items were almost impossible to detect in the darkness. The Coast Guard continued to broadcast calls to the Fitzgerald. Each message ended with a brief pause, leaving space for a reply that never came. Operators then repeated the transmission, shifting frequencies and checking for signal bleed. Nothing returned. When the storm began to weaken slightly after midnight, the first of the Coast Guard's helicopters prepared for launch. The aircraft required careful assessment of wind speeds and visibility. Pilots took into account the distance to the search area and the fuel necessary for a round trip. Once airborne, the helicopter followed a path along the lake's southern shore before turning north toward the Andersons' reported location. From the air, the storm's scale was clear. Wind streaks marked the surface of the lake. Snowbands moved in long, sweeping arcs. The helicopter crew scanned the turbulent water for signs of wreckage, but the storm's remaining force complicated the search. Even from altitude, visibility was sharply reduced. Meanwhile, aboard the Anderson, crew members maintained their search pattern. They recorded the time, position, and conditions in the ship's log. Each entry marked another moment without findings. The absence of debris was puzzling. If the Fitzgerald had broken apart on the surface, some portion of its cargo or structure should have been visible. By the early morning hours of November 11th, the wind began to ease significantly. The waves remained large, but the system was moving east. The storm's departure revealed its impact. The lake surface, though still unsettled, no longer showed the same level of violent unpredictability. Coast Guard vessels now had a safer window to operate. The cutter Woodrush made preparations to depart from its station. The plan was to proceed toward the last known position of the Fitzgerald and carry out a structured grid search. Helicopters continued to sweep the area, widening their search radius and scanning for anything that might provide answers. On the Anderson, officers gathered on the bridge to evaluate the results so far. Despite hours of searching, they had not located debris or oil slicks. The ship's crew remained alert, rotating through lookout shifts as daylight began to return. The rising sun cast a muted glow across the grey surface of the lake. It was then that the first signs of wreckage appeared. A small collection of debris floated in the waves, a piece of lifeboat, splintered and incomplete. The Anderson reported its position to the Coast Guard. This discovery initiated the next phase of the search. Additional pieces were spotted over the following hours: a damaged life ring, loose timber, and small flotation items. None were intact. All showed signs of violent impact. These findings suggested that the wreck had been sudden. There had been no time to deploy lifeboats fully. No distress call had been made. The ship had either broken apart or been overwhelmed so quickly that the crew could not signal for help. The Coast Guard established a formal search grid. Ships and aircraft moved along designated tracks, methodically covering the region. The cutter Woodrush reached the area and launched smaller rescue boats when safe to do so. Divers were not yet part of the plan. The search focused exclusively on locating survivors or additional floating debris. Through the morning and into the afternoon of November 11th, the search continued. No survivors were found. No bodies were recovered. Only fragmented wreckage surfaced, scattered across the lake by wind and waves. By midday, the Coast Guard acknowledged the growing likelihood that the Fitzgerald had sunk with all hands. The absence of survivors and the nature of the debris suggested a catastrophic event. Yet the specific cause remained unknown. The ship had been only minutes from safer water, still underway, and still communicating regularly. There had been no warning. The official search continued for 3 days. Aircraft flew repeated passes. Ships traced overlapping patterns. Weather conditions improved, though the lake remained cold and rough. Each passing hour made survival less likely. The water temperature would have rendered even the most prepared mariner unconscious within minutes. On November 14th, the active search was suspended. The Coast Guard issued a formal statement, noting that no survivors had been found and that the 29 crew members of the Edmund Fitzgerald were presumed lost. The decision marked a somber milestone. Families of the crew had been waiting for any word of rescue. Instead, they received confirmation that the ship had vanished completely, leaving only questions. In the days that followed, the focus shifted toward understanding what had happened. Discussions among mariners, shipping companies, and Coast Guard officials centered on the ship's condition, the storm's intensity, and the navigational challenges of the voyage. But without visual confirmation of the wreck, theories remained speculative. Attention soon turned toward the possibility of using underwater survey technology to locate the Fitzgerald on the lake bed. Lake Superior's depths in the region near Whitefish Bay exceeded 500 feet. The lake's cold, clear water offered certain advantages for sonar imaging, though the technology required specialized vessels and equipment. The first step was to define a search area using the last confirmed coordinates from the Anderson's radar and the debris recovered on the surface. By triangulating these points and adjusting for drift patterns, investigators developed a target zone for underwater scans. A Canadian naval vessel equipped with advanced sonar systems joined the effort. The sonar sweep mapped the lake bed in detailed lines, searching for shapes or anomalies consistent with a large steel hull. After several days of scanning, the sonar revealed a significant object resting on the bottom. Its dimensions matched those of the Fitzgerald. Divers were eventually sent down using a submersible vehicle. The first images captured of the wreck showed the ship broken into 2 main sections. The bow remained upright, buried in the lakebed sediment. The stern lay several hundred feet away. Debris surrounded both sections. These findings confirmed the ship had broken apart rapidly, but the cause of that break remained a matter of study. Whether the hull had been overwhelmed by a massive wave, grounded on a shoal, or suffered a structural failure under repeated stress, the evidence was not immediately definitive. In the weeks after the discovery, public interest grew. Newspapers across the region reported on the search and the findings. Families of the crew sought answers. Mariners debated the storm's conditions and the ship's stability. The Great Lakes shipping industry reviewed safety protocols, loading procedures, and navigational practices. Yet, even as more information emerged, the disappearance retained an air of mystery. There had been no distress signal, no call for assistance. The ship had simply vanished in a moment when it appeared to be holding steady. The suddenness of the sinking became one of the defining elements of the story. the storm of November 1975, entered Great Lakes history not only for its strength, but for its impact. Mariners across the region recalled their own encounters with heavy seas and near misses. Some described the storm as unmatched in their experience. Others drew comparisons to earlier events, including the 1905 Mataafa storm and the 1913 Great Storm, both of which claimed numerous vessels. But the loss of the Fitzgerald resonated in a different way. It involved one of the largest and most modern ships on the lakes. The crew was experienced. The route was familiar. The timing, so close to Whitefish Bay, made the sinking all the more difficult to understand. In the aftermath of the search and the discovery of the wreck, the narrative shifted toward investigation. Theories emerged. Some were grounded in structural analysis. Others relied on mariner testimony or storm modeling. A few were speculative. The lake, as always, held its silence. The disappearance of the Edmund Fitzgerald left behind a story shaped by equal parts fact and absence. The facts described a powerful storm, a damaged ship, and a sudden loss. The absence came from the missing details in the final minutes, the lack of witnesses, and the questions that remained unanswered. In the broader history of the Great Lakes, the loss of the Fitzgerald became a defining event. It led to changes in shipping regulations, storm forecasting, and vessel design standards. It also became part of the region's cultural memory, recalled in stories, memorials, and music. Yet at its core, the story remained one of human lives. 29 sailors sailed into the storm. 29 lives were lost in the cold waters of Lake Superior. Their names are remembered in maritime records, memorial services, and the preserved history of the Great Lakes. As the lake settled in the days after the storm, the surface once again grew calm. The wind eased, snow melted from the shoreline. But beneath, in the deep water near Whitefish Bay, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald lay silent, the final resting place of the ship and her crew. The next chapter turns toward the investigation, the theories, the structural findings, the storm analysis, and the questions that continue to shape our understanding of what happened.